What up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kevin, for those of you that don't know me. Today, I'm going to be diving into a pretty touchy topic, one that runs pretty deep, and one that we're all pretty familiar with, which is relationships. And I kind of want to frame this conversation in a way that just offers you some insight and some awareness around some things that have been really helpful for me. And hopefully you can take something away from it and show up a little bit differently in your relationships. So, one thing that we're all familiar with is getting triggered. And no matter how far along the journey you are in being in relationship with your triggers, there's always going to be something that shows up, and there's always going to be something that you can improve on, expand your capacity, and make better decisions and react from a less reactive place. So, more or less what I wanted to highlight is that triggers are something that we just have to work with. And they're actually the key to what's unresolved inside us. And if we can look at it from that perspective, I think it's really empowering. And it means that we get to work through some layers of ourselves and move through them so that we don't have to keep carrying them with us. A key part of this conversation is that if you don't address your triggers and you don't address your patterns in relationships, they're just going to keep showing up, and you're just going to continue getting to this point where you're at boiling point and you don't understand what's going on, and you're probably pointing the finger, which I've definitely been guilty of myself. So, mainly, I want to take this in two different directions. I want to highlight the relationship that we have with our parents and how that plays into our relationship. And I also want to shine a light on where toxic patterns might be coming up and where there might need a change, might need to be made. So there's a level of acceptance that needs to be made, and we need to move through our own stuff and not project that onto our partners. But there's also another aspect, which is if you're in a toxic pattern or a toxic cycle, you got to pull the plug, really. So the way I'm going to shape this is from the perspective of the relationship that we have with our parents, because that's usually where our patterns that's the reason why our patterns show up. And there's sort of an aspect of what's familiar being something that we just carry on forward with, rather than making a conscious decision to choose differently. So I've got a free PDF in the description. I encourage you guys to check it out. There's a couple of exercises on there. Or you can follow along. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. So, first thing I want to highlight, and the first thing that I want to ask is, can you identify the three biggest triggers, or the three things that you dislike the most in your mum and in your dad? So we're looking at our parents and we're thinking, what are the things that trigger us the most, or what are the things we dislike the most? Because these three things, 99% of the time, is the same triggers that show up in our relationships with our partners. So if we can get an idea of what's unresolved, which is most of the time our three biggest triggers in our parents and how they correlate to our partnerships. So it might be sort of, a lot of us have different emotional wounds, but a lot of this sort of can come, or a lot of it boils down to two core wounds, which for men is I'm not enough. So any sense of criticism or anything that you feel like is shown to you, and then that triggers a response that I'm not enough. And then the other thing that I guess a lot of women generally deal with is that they're too much. And it's usually a relationship where men continue making women feel like they are too much when they bring their needs to us. So it's a really interesting relationship. There's a podcast that I did with a family systems practitioner called Tiziano Squesso, I believe is the surname. I've got that podcast on this channel, so I encourage you guys to check it out. It'll give you an even deeper look into why these things play out and the patterning behind it. But fundamentally, the things that you dislike in your parents are probably showing up in your relationships. And the way that we can work with this is first by creating an awareness around that. And secondly, going back to the root cause and actually seeing where our needs weren't met when we were a child, and seeing if we can find a level of acceptance and we can move and grow past this pain point. Because in my experience, if you continue to point the blame and you continue to hold on to a sense of resentment, then these patterns are just going to keep showing up in our relationships. And it's not what we want, ultimately. So identify the three biggest triggers you have with your parents and your partners. And this awareness in itself is gonna get the ball rolling. So, yeah. Now, I guess I want to touch on a couple of things, which is what these wounds might look like. So, if you had to earn love as a child, or you thought you had to perform in order to receive love, that might be something that's showing up in your relationship. If your parent was emotionally absent or unavailable, or you just couldn't get that level of support that you needed, then we're always going to try and find that in our partner. And that's another example. Really, at the end of the day, our relationships, we're going to attract what mirrors our unresolved wounds. And if you can look at relationships this way, it's actually just a huge catalyst for growth within that container. And that's the main message that I want to share today. Now, our triggers are going to be our teachers. So I think the thing that I want to highlight is sort of once we have this awareness, like what do we do about it? And this might require you doing a lot of inner work and sitting with yourself, a lot of self-inquiry, a lot of curiosity, because generally where our triggers are in our partners, there's sort of a core wound where this all started. And if you can get to the core wound in your childhood where it happened, or maybe a series of events where it showed up, then we can start working with our with ourselves in a more sort of compassionate and understanding way, because a lot of the time we sort of get triggered, and then we also then shame ourselves for being triggered, and we're like, why does this come up? When we can understand where it's come from, there can be a lot more compassion for ourselves, and fundamentally it allows us to go back into our history and to rewrite the past, because even though maybe our needs weren't met or we were traumatized in a certain way, as a child we internalize things so much differently than we do as adults, because we don't have the vocabulary or the life experience to realize that a lot of the time people aren't personally out to hurt us or out to get us. Now, there's obviously some extreme cases with this where parents are totally absent, or there's a lot of trauma or a lot of toxicity in your family life growing up in the household. And it's not to negate any of that, but what I will say is, if you can't come to a level of acceptance for what happened to you, you're always going to be rerunning that story, and you're going to continue to attract the same partners, repeat the same patterns, and nothing can really change. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is find a level of forgiveness and acceptance, because there's usually a gift within all of our hurt. There's usually something that we can take away. And what happened in our childhood, we don't need to carry with us. So let's have a look. I'm just having a look at my notes here, which I'm just reading off the PDF, so go check that out. So something that you can do, which is sort of like a self-inquiry exercise, is basically at the end of every week or whenever you get triggered, sort of just try to pause and don't react, because in that pause is where all of the magic really is. That's where we can start to rewrite the pattern. And if we can sort of step in with a level of curiosity, then we can hopefully hopefully pinpoint where this is coming from. So when it happens, don't react, pause, and try to ask yourself, what parts of me need healing? And from, I guess, the masculine perspective, whenever a woman sort of brings something to you which seems somewhat criticizing, more common than not, we take it pretty personally. And this is where a lot of conflict shows up in relationships for men, is we take things on so personally rather than seeing things from a perspective that our partner, our woman, is bringing something that's her pain or her hurt, or that's something that's on her heart, and she's bringing that to us because she wants to, because she cares about you and because she cares about the partnership. And when we're not looking through the lens of I'm not good enough, then we can actually start to show up a lot better for our partners. So that's been a big one for me. I've definitely in the past taken things really personally, and it still shows up from time to time. So for me, it's been a process of when these things come up is sort of just pausing, taking a breath, and trying to bring my focus back to my partner. Because what's on her heart is what really is most important if you care about the relationship. So, yeah, you're not broken, guys. It's just there's patterns, there's toxicity that's played out, and everyone is in the same boat. If you have been in a relationship, you would have come across these dynamics before. And if you want to have healthy relationships, it's really important that we have this awareness. So, yeah, I think the only thing I just want to touch on maybe is just the distinction between what are toxic patterns, things that aren't good for you at all, because there's triggers that are for us to heal, and then there's also behavior that's just not healthy. And if you're in that dynamic, I don't encourage you to stay and find acceptance. But the reason why you attract partners like that is probably because there's an unresolved wound, and there's sort of a familiar dynamic that's playing out from our childhood, which is what love was modeled to us, and how love was modeled to us might be a little bit skewed. So I'll leave that one with you. But yeah, ultimately, this has been such a big catalyst for my growth. And when you can look at relationships like this, it really just changes the game. And you can really grow in partnership really strongly. And the more things that you can move through together, the stronger your relationship is going to be. So, hope it was valuable, and I'll see you in the next one. Much love.